I was initially asked to talk about an area that I'm specialized in, which is public policy and the objectives of the Sharia. However, I wanted to take a step back and talk about something I believe is more fundamental to citizenship discussions today. And the portal conversation that I participated in this morning, if some of you are familiar, the portal just outside of the Sheraton Hotel, where we were able to communicate with Syrian refugees and internally displaced Iraqis. And the discussion that emerged was, how do we move people to more humane understandings in the world, not just of the refugee crisis, but of our shared understanding of citizenship? What are the foundations of dialogue? How should we be dialoguing? And what ought to form the foundation of our identities? And I believe this is as human beings, not just as citizens. So I decided to take a step back and talk a little bit about two fields, ethics and morality in Islam, and in particular the works of Professor Ismail Farouqi and Professor Muhammad Abdullah Draz. In the work of Tawheed, its implications for thought and life, we have a magnificent exposition of unification, or how we can bring disparate and diverse elements of all creation, not just humanity, together. And in Muhammad Abdullah Draz's The Moral World of the Quran, we could also see a unifying law of morality. I believe that, and they do form part of the foundation of the work that I do in policy studies, especially the ethical foundation of the policy framework. But today I want to bring the discussion closer to citizenship. I think you'll find throughout the discussion that these understandings can move us closer to peaceful coexistence and to active participation in the production of social goods. They emphasize the importance of human rights and the rights of other creation. So in the work of Professor Farouqi, he posits, or he talks about Tawheed extensively, which to me is the summation of the Quran's theory of ethics. In fact, I believe that Tawheed, or unification, is the core purpose of the guidance in the Sharia. It is the heart of the Sharia system of ethics, in other words. Now, a simple understanding of Tawheed, as most of you are familiar, is the oneness of God. But a more complex understanding that Islamic ethic demands is, how do we translate that oneness of God into a truth that integrates revealed and unrevealed knowledge. Duality Principle is a general view of reality, and I'm quoting him, of truth, of the world, of space, of time, of human history and destiny. And it's characterized by important principles. The Duality Principle basically says that everything is comprised of God and non-God. In the first order, there is God unique with no partners. And in the second order, there's absolutely everything else. Our relationship to that first order is ideational, he says. So basically it's through memory, imagination, apprehension, intuition, observation, and reasoning. In the second order, which is the realm of non-God, there's all creation, the world of things, plants, animals, human, angels, the earth, paradise, hell, all their becoming since they came into being. Now, I take his second order and I divide it into two suborders in my research, because I think we need to distinguish between two suborders. In the first suborder, there is the individual. There is you. Unique. Nobody is like you. Once you've been created, that's it. And then there's everything else in the second suborder. So there's two suborders of the second order. Yourself and then everything else. And that distinction is important because it gives a concrete dimension to your relationship with the first order. How you interact with everything in that second suborder defines your relationship with God, in a sense. So it's not just the acts of worship, but it's how we act upon the world, how we act upon each other. So that distinction, I feel, is very important when we're talking about citizenship. It also forces us to think what our purpose is in life. What are we here for? What are we here to do? And this, according to Al-Farouqi, is called the Principle of Teleology. The cosmos is purposive by design. every individual, along with everything else, all created matter, is purposeful. For us, it is to accept that God created us with human dispositions, with certain interests. As citizens, to have that as the base of our ethical philosophy is to accept diversity, it's to accept pluralism. It's to understand that this is one of the sunan or divine laws of God in how He created us. So it underscores the necessity of accepting that diversity. And it demands the acceptance and recognition of the individual and the communal other. And both are mentioned in the Quran separately. Both have different dispositions. Even groups are noted as having different dispositions and different interests. And to know that that is divine law and to respect that. The second order, thus, is also characterized by the principle of interdependence. That's not Al-Faruqi's work, that's mine. But it comes out of his work. So our relationships are both ideational and they're concrete. And man, or humans, men and women, come with a primordial instinct to attachment. In the very first verse of the Revelation of the Quran, the very first verse, God said He created us from something that clings, alaq, or something that is dependent. We're dependent in our very inception, our very being. We cannot exist without having attached within the womb. We cannot. And that is a primordial instinct. And in the Quran, we also have God giving us the example. He says God does not disdain from giving the example of a gnat or a fly or a small mosquito. Why? Because it is so significant to the web of life. So when you think of that example, what of humanity? If a gnat has such significance in the Quran, then what of the human being? So Tawheed presents one fundamental meaning, and that it is that all creation, in one way or another, is joined and hence dependent. Indeed, that is our primary covenant with God, not to sever what He commanded to be joined. Now, in policy studies, that's a very tall order, and it creates a huge conundrum when it comes to defining boundaries. How do we define problems if absolutely everything counts? Where do we cut off our calculations of welfare, of benefits, of harms, if absolutely everything counts? The Quranic answer to this is through its moral system. So its ethical system is what justice demands. Its moral system is what we strive for as human beings. Now, the moral law of the Quran also aims to unity, which is not surprising. First of all, because it confirms what came before it, but also because it approaches humanity holistically, spiritually, psychologically, intellectually, logically, physically, and socially. It targets both heart and reason. And I'll tell you right now, you might be thinking, yes, and Professor Draz addresses this absolutely beautifully in chapter 6 of his Moral World of the Quran, which is, this is a religious morality and ethics, and he says, but not in an unqualified way. It is conditioned. So he says, Quranic ethics is comprehensive, so it extends over everything. Whereas the acts of worship for Muslims are just one aspect of that, and a limited aspect. Also, the Quranic rules, ethical rules, are verified in this life. Sanction is verified in this life, not just in the afterlife or beyond the grave. It doesn't only appeal to fear and hope, but equally to reason and emotion. So then he says, okay, but somebody could say, but it comes from a religious text, it comes from the Quran. And then he says, but the law of conscience preceded, it existentially preceded religion. And that religion did not come to abolish natural law, but we need natural law to establish, accept, assimilate, and synthesize it. And finally, he states that there are no, or very few, rules that are quantitatively or qualitatively determined in the Quran, which means you have to use your reason. It is just a starting point. So in his theory, which is absolutely brilliant, if you have not read his book, I highly recommend it. It's called The Moral World of the Quran, and it is a comparative with Western philosophy and fiqh. He says there's 5 elements to Islamic morality or Quranic morality, and I'm not going to get into them because we don't have time, but they consist of obligation, responsibility, sanction, which is the law's reaction to our attitude, intention, and effort. And he states in the obligation that every human soul, absolutely everybody, is imprinted with fundamental truths of good and evil. And that's important for citizenship. It's important for all of us to understand that everybody is endowed with a light, whether they're a believer or non-believer, whatever faith they come from. And that's important to recognize. For a believer, though, all responsibilities are subordinated to religious responsibilities. So to uphold truth, mercy, justice, equity, fairness takes precedent over even our closest relations. Again, a very important concept in citizenship. Sanction, as I mentioned, is the reaction of the law to our attitude. And here, there's an important point as well, because violating the rights of others is a violation of human rights and can only be redressed by humans. Violating personal rights is violating divine rights. So if you're not carrying out your personal duties, then you're violating divine rights. And he lists what the rules and what the virtues would be. And I'll just very few of them to give you an idea how this can contribute to active social citizenship. To take care to inquire into one's duties, to teach others theirs, moral effort, conforming to what's good, righteousness, striving to perform what is good or even best, the most beautiful action, the best words. At the level of the state, you can see in the Quran, peacemaking, mutual defense, clemency, immunity, asylum, allowance for probation, opportunity to avoid hostilities, safe passage, as well as acknowledging people's right to belonging and a homeland. Now, the capacity to assimilate, synthesize, prioritize, and express these rules and these virtues in a way that dignifies human nature and allows every individual to partake in the development and expression of the law is an integral part of the system. To know these things is only the starting point. To actualize them, we have to use our reason, and we partake this way in the creation of the law. And to end, Draz, actually, his phrase is beautiful. He says that in doing so, we are active citizens. So in the Islamic world, in its morality, in its ethics, we are active citizens. And so that can be carried to an active citizenship in the real world. Thank you.